Yeah, it's going now.
Okay,
yep.
Brilliant. So, I just wanted to give an introduction to social norms because I think it'll be most interesting and rich sharing our experiences and reflecting together. But yeah, this is just a short presentation to introduce some of the ideas, some of the language, some of the places where it's most pertinent. I should say that lots of the material from here is based on UNFPA and UNICEF's Manual on Social Norms and Change. I really recommend everyone to check it out. It's a facilitated manual, there's presentations in there, all sorts of resources, which the UNFPA and UNICEF have made. So I've credited everything on there, you'll see them popping up, but it's a really good resource on social norms. So, a definition, what is a social norm? A social norm is a rule of behaviour to a relevant population. So, individuals see other people conforming to this social behaviour rule, and they feel a social obligation to conform to that rule as well. And they believe that it's important that there's a sense of social punishment if they don't conform to the rule. Perhaps they'll be criticised or excluded. And that's what distinguishes a social norm from a cultural practice, this sense of some kind of behavioural sanctions if you don't comply with the behaviour. It's quite sort of apocalyptic language, and we'll see it manifest in different ways. But there are some key elements. So it's a conditional preference based on the obligations felt within a relevant population. That means that behaviour as influence is conditioned by conscious and unconscious beliefs. We'll see a diagram on the next slide. And these include attitudes, so personal normative beliefs, knowledge about the physical world, more personal empirical beliefs, and social expectations, which are dependent on the network of persons within. So here's a diagram from the UNFPA manual, which shows people's conditional preference for their behaviour, how it's informed by these different things, and how these come together to create the social norm. So as we mentioned, it's knowledge, what you see in the world around you, what you know to be true, how you behave according to that. Your attitudes or personal beliefs that are informed by all sorts of things as you've grown up. And then importantly, social expectations. So if we break the social expectations down a bit more, and I realise this is quite technical, but it'll become more real later, the social expectations can be split into empirical beliefs, and that's about what other people will do. So that's what you expect other people to do around you, to actually do or act in a certain situation. And then there's normative expectations, which is how you think other people think you should act. So there's the normative, how people think you're going to act, and then the empirical, how other people will react. And
is that similar to descriptive and injunctive?
Yeah, I suppose.
I think this.
I thought empirical would be descriptive, what you think other people do, and injunctive what you think.
It's one, yeah. The descriptive is what you think other people do, and then the injunctive is what you think they approve or disapprove.
Okay.
But I think this is the academic Christina Bicchieri's thinking is behind this, and she kind of says the injunctive descriptive isn't quite enough, so she sort of adds to it, which is kind of going on here with the it's the sanction that kind of is the added.
So this is where added on to what you think the injunctive, what you think other people think or approve or disapprove of, are sanctions, how other people will positively or negatively behave, act in terms of what you do. And research has shown that it's this side, the empirical or the descriptive, which actually drives people's behaviour the most. What kind of most drives you is what you think other people will do so that you behave in a similar way rather than what other people think. I have a little...
Rather than the sanction.
Rather than the sanction.
That's what the sanction is.
The sanction's probably, it's probably very powerful. I think here, let me show you this video.
Sorry.
No, this is just, oh no, and now it won't show. Of course. This video, perhaps you know it, this is from a TV show that was on years and years ago. And they have what's called a camera, a hidden camera in a lift, and they're seeing how people's behaviour is influenced. So this guy's standing in the lift, and then a couple of actors walk into the lift and face the back of the lift. And you see this guy kind of look confused for a while, and then he just eventually turns to face the back of the lift, even though it's totally counterintuitive. So thinking back on those bubbles we had before, it's totally counter to his knowledge of the world that the doors will open in front of him to face that way. But the social expectation, the kind of empirical knowledge that everyone is doing is turning to the back of the lift that makes him turn. And this clip is quite fun because they do it with a number of people again and again. And so quickly, this kind of microcosm of a social norm is created, and you see people's behaviour change really quickly. And it's quite funny in this case, just a number of stunned people.
But if they didn't do it, they wouldn't be sanctioned in any way, would they?
I guess then it comes into the injunctive sense of embarrassment or shame of appearing stupid. Yeah, I
think the sanction can be much more subtle than...
Yeah.
It work quite hard to find the sanctions.
And it's kind of a demonstration of how the empirical, the descriptive, is so powerful. Actually, just doing something that nobody else is doing is so much of a deterrent that people would rather follow social expectations, new unusual social expectations. So I wanted to just talk a bit as well about the relevant network, because of course that's really important to how social norms are created. Particularly thinking of the socio-ecological model, which I'm sure many of you recognise. This was designed, or the kind of first conceptual framing of it, by Bronfman Turner in the 70s. And he conceived these different spheres within spheres of influence which a person is in. And it's a useful framework to think about how people are influenced, going from the individual level to the interpersonal with smaller groups of families and friends within your household or social networks, to the organisational, the institutional, that might be schools or workplaces, to the community. That's often difficult to define, although everyone uses the word a lot, but what are the social expectations of the community within, and then all the way up to public policy. So one of the ways we might think of social norms are norms of violence in certain communities. I actually brought up a picture of gang violence in Côte d'Ivoire because Jackie's done some work in Côte d'Ivoire with former, with InsightShare as well, an organisation doing participatory video. They've worked with former gang members working to kind of undo the social norm of violence, to navigate those social and change those social expectations. So here I would have put Jackie in the spotlight, and she would have given us some insights as to what she experienced there. But she's not here. But
has there been any evidence
of change?
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting with the way InsightShare works, they work with small groups in a participatory video process. So there they kind of create this new relevant network in which social expectations are created. So on that interpersonal level of the socio-ecological model, they do create a new social norm, and kind of hierarchies of respect, which were previously earned through showing muscle or firearms, are turned into a kind of, there becomes this new kind of machismo of being very honest about what you've done and kind of talking about it and articulating how you've changed, which is unsure how kind of long-term how long-term that sort of change would be, but it's definitely, you see within this workshop space, a new social norm is established. And then the kids with the participatory videos they've created, take them around the country to different organisations, different settings, to kind of steer social expectations within different settings. The kind of social norm for violence among students in Côte d'Ivoire is also particularly interesting, thinking about the socio-ecological model, because on the institutional level it's particularly strong. certain government parties that really pursue the politicisation of schools in Côte d'Ivoire. So that means that social expectation for violence is really coming in strongly at the school or institutional school level, which isn't perhaps something you'd expect. You might think it might be more within their household or community level. So this is just one example, and actually WHO have done a fair amount of different types of social norms for violence between partners within the household, violence against children, and violence against women. So that was something we can talk about afterwards. Learning ignorance, which is a term that feels very uncomfortable, but is an interesting phenomenon, which is when individuals see other people conform to a social norm and incorrectly believe that these people support it. So a social norm is preserved, even though individual support of it is being eroded. And this is often because there aren't transparent communication or information flows. So the social norm, is surviving in spite of individual support. So an example of this is, this is a photo of child marriage in Rajasthan actually, but from National Geographic. But an example which UNFPA gives is in Nepal, the average marriage age for children is 13, whereas surveying families across the country, most parents believe that children should be married at 18, but on seeing everyone else marry their children at 13, they conform to a social norm, even though in general there's not a lot of support for child marriage. And that's seen kind of more quantitatively in this diagram about the support for female genital cutting in contrast to the practice. So the practice is in yellow, and the number of people who think it should continue is in blue. This is a fascinating diagram for the kind of variation of situations it presents, and perhaps it's something we can talk about more later. You see some countries like Yemen, there's actually more people who approve of it than it happens. There's huge, in places like Djibouti or Sudan, a huge difference in the number of people, in the proportion of the population who practice it versus the proportion who support it. Of course, this is a huge range of countries, I'm not sure what the data is.
Is this perhaps indicative of the fact that the sanction might be real? I mean, they might be expressing a personal belief, but knowing that they will be ostracised by their community if they don't follow it.
Right. Or their daughter won't be married.
Yeah. Rather than believing that the practice in itself is enough.
So you're saying that actually people are expressing not their genuine attitude.
They don't really have a choice because the sanctions outweigh the...
But they're expressing what they think what they should say.
Or they're frightened of the consequences if they don't.
Because I look at that and think, oh, Burkina Faso, that looks like a good place for an intervention. Just because of the massive gap between prevalence and...
Yeah, that's extraordinary.
And then which is worth thinking about, particularly in the context of communications, is when there's a gap like this, in the context of a social norm, where can communication and opening up that conversation and allowing people to speak their beliefs without sanction, there seems to be an important role for media and communications in gaps like this.
But also, could it be partly about like the structure that was doing the actual data collection here as well? For example, that people are saying what they think fits within the
social desirability.
Yeah. And that which could work both ways. People over into the interviewer effect, or people in some of these instances scared to say they support it. Sanctions working. Also, a mini social expectation within the interview work, which can work that way.
But I guess it also points to the fact that you probably need to dig a bit deeper to understand what's keeping that in place, because it's easy to make assumptions that it's because people are disapproving of it. It might be other reasons.
And I think although the diagrams earlier on although they're clunky, trying to split up motivations for behaviour, it does raise some, it does kind of help you to anatomise why people might behave in certain ways and think about what the very simplest might be, as you say, because you can't just jump to the conclusion that it's one or the other. So the last thing to think about, and this is taken directly from the manual, is how do you go about shifting a social norm? And the pathway that's set out in this manual is beginning with a core group who engage in sustained value deliberations. So there's a disruption in the social norms, and a group, for example, here we see a group of young women who are on their way to a public declaration for FGC abandonment in Senegal. It might be a core group like this, younger women who have motivations, perhaps they've been exposed to other relevant networks, thinking back on this diagram, or wherever their motivation comes to disrupt and reassess the values that their social group is operating with. So first we have this core group who are deliberating on their values. Then if this is kind of in an implementation or programmatic framework, then we see an organised diffusion of deliberations from this central core out to a community or other relevant communities. That's the bit that I think can really take time and needs to be on a scale. Well, we can talk about the scale that this is achievable on the pace. Until enough people are ready to change. And then, here this is a photo from Senegal again, and this is the public declaration for FGC abandonment in 2004 community. Yes. So we see more and more people have become involved. And this involves on a mass scale a recategorisation of behaviour and gathering a critical mass until there's a tipping point when a new social norm is created. There has to kind of flip, there has to be a new norm created. On this mass scale, you can see that this is the kind of scale that's needed. An individual family can't change on their own. And programming that aims towards that is likely to fail in the context of the social norm. There has to be this critical mass and a tipping point of the social norm. And then, eventually, hopefully, a coordinated shift among everyone and a visible manifestation of this shift in the social norm. And they recommend future-oriented celebration of what's going on. So there's a very simplified pathway for what could happen. So to sum up, before some questions, a social norms perspective on work can be used to explain social dynamics in a more nuanced, less binary, fewer assumptions in a way. It picks apart people's behaviour and it shows how interdependent people's action is within the community. And it shows why changing social expectations, not just individual behaviour, is key to affecting social norms shift. So I think we'll have many more questions than these to talk about, but some I thought were it would be really interesting to hear experience in the room of people working maybe directly in the creation or abandonment of social norms, or whether anyone has reflections on how social norms have affected their work. What are the implications of situations like we're talking about with FGC of pluralistic ignorance for our work in media and communications, information sharing? And finally, there's an interesting confluence of the social norms perspective and a human rights-based approach. There are differences between them and some similarities, but we want to think of the two of them together. And then the last photo I have is from the artist Carrie Williams. It's just a nice picture. Think about social norms and how they affect our lives too. It's So thank you. Let's open it up for discussion. And